You know, if you're gonna wear old lady glasses, make them cute. So anyway, I'm going to talk tonight about what it took to make this book. Records of the Salem Witch Hunt is the size of a ream of paper with a hardcover on it. You can get it in paperback. I don't get any residuals or anything from it. $57 at Amazon. If you've got an ancestor, it's an awesome resource because we went back to all of the original primary sources and retranscribed them. Now, there have been transcriptions over the years, but they had errors, sometimes with names and dates. That's a little tough. And we had a team of 6 linguists from Scandinavia who really wanted to do everything absolutely right. I watched 2 of them have a conversation for 20 minutes about whether one letter was superscript or not, and what the implications were. And I'm thinking the implications are we thought there was 2 or 3 years and now it's 10. But they wanted to get it done right, and we had all sorts of things that came about as we put this book together. So that's what the talk is about. If you fall asleep in the middle of it, that's okay. It's a nice warm room. You can catch up on it, go back, C-SPAN. I have a few things that I mixed up a little bit because I'm always rethinking any of my talks. If you hear me talk one time and another time, you go, she didn't say that last time. So anyway, without any further ado, this is the book. I've never seen this many together in one time since I first got it. I could order some, and my parents wanted one, all sorts of things. So I had this wonderful picture. I staged it and everything. I've never ever seen this many copies of it together at once. This was a labor of love. Bernie Rosenthal, who was the general editor, put together the team of us, and I have no reason to believe that he knew anything about me before he asked me to be his project manager. It turns out that he'd just gotten a National Endowment for Humanities grant to do this, and his friend and person who was going to be his project manager dropped dead. And it was just like, what do you do when you're ready to roll and you've lost a dear friend and someone who's critical to the project? And somehow I managed to ask him a question in an email right around that time, and it was a question that was so detailed and had such a specific thing. He asked me if I'd be his project manager. Okay. And the thing that really hooked me was when I was talking to him. On his computer, he had some digital images of the documents, and right then and there, I wanted to do it because I thought, you know, if you look at the handwriting, you can tell whose handwriting it is. That would be cool. And that ended up being something that we put in the book that wasn't in the original plan. So I want to talk to you about what kinds of documents we were looking at and what it took for us to put them all together. So I do want to give credit to all the other people. Bernie and I were doing things, but Joe Flibbert, who was a professor at Salem State, does anybody know him? He was Bernie's friend who passed away. Also we had Matti Rissanen from Helsinki. We had Risto Hiltunen from Turku, Mirja, her name has an umlaut in it, Hito, she's Finnish but at the University of Uppsala in Sweden. Peter Grund was her student in Uppsala and now he's at Kansas. Lena Tarka, God, it's been a long time, Lena Kalastarka, and she was working at the University of Helsinki. We also had Matti, who's the other Matti? Oh, 2 of them. Matti Pekola, who's also at Turku. And then for the Americans, we had Dick Trask, we had Ben Ray, we had Marilyn Roach. It was like a team of all-stars. Gretchen Adams, she's written a fabulous book called Spectre of Salem and how the whole use of witch hunts has been used over time, specifically in the 19th century. And that should be it. So it's a good bunch of people working on this. But first we had to figure out what are we looking at? And we started with microfilm of a lot of documents because that's how you could get to them. And Ben Ray wrote a grant and got them digitized. For better or for worse, but it was a start because we had all these people in Scandinavia who were going to be starting to do this work. We had a lot of different kinds of documents, and this isn't the time where I'll tell you exactly how trials worked. But basically, there are 3 phases. One is an investigation. This would be somebody would accuse you. You might get arrested, brought in, and interrogated by the magistrates. If that held, and they wanted to go forward, then they'd have a grand jury or an inquest looking for all the evidence that they would need, whether it was girls claiming spectral affliction, or whether you had witches' teats, or they examined the body of a dead person to see if they were killed by witchcraft. They would look for poppets, things like that. And if they found enough stuff, they would write an indictment specifying the crime. So at that point in the inquest, and then the prosecutions, once they had an indictment, they brought it before the jury of trials. So that's the basic flow. These documents, this one is an account of an interrogation of Margaret Corey. The next one is the indictment one of the indictments against Rebecca Nurse. And then that is on the right, that's the warrant for the execution of Bridget Bishop. So we have lots and lots of documents, but that's the basic flow of how prosecution takes place. So we have a lot of different sources. We have original manuscripts, and when we were looking at them on the microfilm, that's what they looked like on the left. And when we actually went to see the original manuscripts, oh, look at that, on the right. And you could see the colors of the ink. That was because 2 different people wrote it. In legal times, you know, when you have a nice boilerplate, well, they did them by hand. And then the prosecuting attorney filled it in. You can see that reddish ink. So we were finding things by looking at the original manuscripts to see what kinds of things would show up that have never even been in transcriptions before. We were looking, we identified whose handwriting was in these. We don't know who did the boilerplate, but we sure know who had filled it in because that was the prosecutor. We also, by that we could say, oh, switched hands back and forth. So we kept track of what handwriting changed on the document, because it wasn't like a letter. We'd say, dear Mom, please send more candy in my care package. Camp is kind of boring. It's been raining. Love me. You didn't have that because there were all sorts of different people writing things on the same documents. So we were keeping track of that. Originally, I was really interested because, hey, we can tell who did it. But we needed to keep track because different people wrote different ways. And if you saw a small sample here, like in the orange, and you had something that was ambiguous in your reading, it would be very nice to find out if there's another document with like maybe 2 pages in that person's handwriting so you could resolve your ambiguities. So we kept track across all of them, and ultimately in the book we included I think about 24, 25 people that we named, that we could name across all of these documents. It was a nice big relational database. It was just an amazing feat to do it. We've been using it as a tool, and at a certain point we said, are we going to include this information in the book? And we said, okay. Like I said, 12 people, 10 years. Wasn't really the plan, but I think it actually revealed a few things for people. So by looking at the original manuscripts and going to all the archives, some of them are held by the Phillips Library at the Peabody Essex. I think right now, are they still in Peabody? Did I hear they're going to Rowley? Is that what we're hearing, the rumors?
Parts of it.
Huh?
Part of it, I think.
Part of it. Oh, lovely. We've been keeping track of where the Essex County Court documents are, and they weren't available for several years. We're really lucky that they didn't decide to close down the Phillips Library for renovations before we finished. So we had to wait several years to be able to get to them again, just as researchers. But they were very, very gracious and helpful for getting us all of these documents that are there. Those aren't all the documents. We were also looking at the Massachusetts Archives, and there at the Massachusetts Archives, they'd like you to be happy with microfilm. You're there at the archive, and they say, oh, you can check the microfilm. That's in that drawer. Here you go. Do you know how to use the machine? And oh, here. I want to see the manuscripts. It really helped that I contacted people ahead of time. They knew who I was, what I was doing. And there's one point that Bernie was with me there, and he wanted to see a particular document. He went up, and they sent him to the microfilm. And I said, wait, I went up and said, could I get this from the vault? Oh, sure. Because they'd seen me a lot. Archivists don't really want you to touch their documents, right? Right. So you have to have a good reputation to get to these things. You have to make sure you clear everything, things like that. You can get to these documents, you can. It's just a little extra work, and you have to have a good reputation for handling them. People are very happy that Ben Ray at the University of Virginia has included all sorts of digital versions of these documents, because that really reduces how many people want to actually go and see the documents, because, well, you can see it digitally, people are happy. And we did go back. Part of the things you will find at the site are these new color scans that Ben and I did a lot of. We had to come up with some of these things because our colleagues were, generally speaking, in Scandinavia. We did bring them over for sort of a marathon session, but they couldn't see everything they wanted to see, and they were still stuck with the things from microfilm. So it was really nice to be able to provide a lot of those. I spent a lot of time scanning things. I don't think they'd let me do that again, but they might for a special project on a day that it's not open to the public, so nobody else gets to see you. But it was really fantastic holding these things. As a descendant of Rebecca Nurse, holding this document was just probably one of the more moving things of the research, because she was my ancestor, and here's the actual document accusing her of the crime. And this is one of the reasons why she was put to death. So that was moving. Some of the other manuscripts that we got, the one on the left, that was the microfilm from the Mass Archives. Not really very good. And poor Gretchen Adams had that Mass Archives volume 135, and she had that to try and transcribe from, and was really struggling, and the linguists were a little frustrated with her, but I knew what she was trying to put up with. So I got a mini grant, and I was able to go to the Mass Archives and get the permission to get volume 135. Volume 135 was about this big, and it was all bound. And each page, essentially the paper had a hole cut in it, the manuscript was put in the middle, and then they silked it, a very fine layer of silk on either side. So you could turn the pages, you could see the back and the front, a little blurred from that, but that was how they were preserving them. Do you know if they can undo that, Anne?
Did they
De-silk them?
Has the silk been applied?
Yeah, they're in the book.
But is it an adhesive on top?
I don't know. Yeah, see, undoing these archival things that have been done in decades, a century ago, is sometimes kind of hard. So even on the right, they weren't really sharp, but I was able to go through and photograph it. Since doing that, they have since taken the whole book apart and then put the individual pages in folders so that you can get individual documents, so to get to them. What was really interesting, though, was that nobody had really looked in that volume personally in a long time, so when I opened it up, something fell out. And it was this on the left. That is a photostat negative of one of the other interrogations. That's for Abigail Hobbs. And it fell out, and I went, oh, we already have this, because the positive of this was at the Massachusetts Historical Society. They have the positive photostat. We do not know where that document is. In the early part of the 20th century, when photostat machines were coming around, people would bring in, I have this old document, you want to make a copy? So the Mass Historical Society has a large collection of photostatic copies of old manuscripts, and nobody knows where they are. I don't know that we have enough provenance to find out. The Mass Historical Society has a name, but this one was just tucked into the bound volume and wasn't, nobody would have known it was there. And then it slipped out, and I went, oh, which is kind of cool, but also, what? You didn't know it was there? But they let me actually, I set it up so that it was like this, so it wouldn't break, and I take a picture and take a picture so that we could have these things. I'll go back. The one on the right is much easier to transcribe than the one on the left. So we had a lot of facsimiles of documents because we didn't have everything. We don't know where a whole lot of things are. So as I said, the one on the left is a photostat. a negative photostat, because they have two. The one in the middle, that was from a 1936 catalog selling this document for $85.
Wow.
Yeah, $85. Did anybody remember how much that Margaret Scott document got at auction last year?
14,000 or something?
Huh?
It was really a lot. I think it was, I want to say 14,000.
No, it was more than that, because,
Okay,
well,
that
maybe,
was the
well,
last one I saw. was
last one I
14,000.
saw, I know that they've gone for 35, they're thousands and thousands of dollars. There are a few that we know that are in private collections, and every once in a while, some collector who's got one of them puts it up for auction, and go, oh, okay, so a lot of them are in the Margaret Scott case, who's one of the women who was executed that most people don't know anything about. But those sell very well. So there are a few in private hands, but then this one, we don't know where it went. But the catalog had an image of it. So here we have a facsimile of a document we do not have. The one on the far right came from a book published in 1904. And, you know, nice old thing, and we were saying it has to be somewhere. So occasionally we actually found things. And it turns out that was located, I think, by Dick Trask, if I'm not mistaken, at the University of Michigan. University of Michigan. So somehow they had ended up with that. Maybe somebody donated it to their library and their rare books. But so we were finding there were some of these. We also had handwritten copies that were done contemporaneously. So in this case, these are two different versions, well, two different documents, which have the account of the examination of John Willard, one of the men who was accused of witchcraft. And Peter Grund, again, one of the Scandinavian linguists for whom I will credit giving us 10 years instead of 3. He's actually written a whole paper on comparing what kinds of things are different between these. We've got another pair for Susanna Martin. And he's also looking at corrections and things like that. You see on the far right, it looks like there's some corrections and blots, things like that. So we have some of these. These were reconstituted from the shorthand that Reverend Harris used to take them down. I mean, you couldn't just whip out your iPhone and record things or put a camera out. I mean, how do you keep track of things? Samuel Parris, being a young minister with aspirations, having the ability to write in shorthand was really valuable, because you could go listen to some of the most eminent divines. You could go hear Cotton Mather and Increase Mather and Samuel Willard preach, and if you knew shorthand, you could write things down and then reconstitute it, and you could give it to the minister. They might publish it. We have a lot of ministers for whom we know a lot of their sermons, and that was because they were written down. There are a lot of other ministers that we have nothing, so we don't have Reverend Dane's sermons. I wish we did, because that would be very interesting, but there are other ones that young ministers would do this. And when people were being interrogated, Samuel Parris was there. I mean, it's a little biased, I don't know. Because it was his daughter and his niece who were accused, and there he is taking down the evidence and the examinations of the people who were supposedly afflicting them. What it seems is that he reconstituted them not identically. Whether he did it at the same time or at a different date, he clearly had a style of doing it in the columns. So we don't know if maybe he did one and then went back and looked at his notes again and fixed it. We basically think the one on the left is the one that was used, and the one on the right was not. It was an earlier version. And we can tell that from some of the things that are on the back, some of the markings that would show up in court. So these are a little odd, but it gives us a chance to see a couple of different views of what was going on. We also have some other handwritten contemporaneous duplicates. The one on the left has actually got the mark of somebody in it, but you can see all these different corrections and things like that. We also, by looking at the originals, we were using magnifying glasses and UV lights to see if we could read what had been crossed out. Most of the previous transcription projects just sort of skipped over stuff that was crossed out, and we went, what's under there? And it's really pretty amazing when you have a manuscript, and there are basically layers of ink. You cross something out, there's another layer, and you take a magnifying glass, they pop. You can just see it separate. And we were also, as I said, using UV lights, seeing if we could get anything to come up that way. So again, Peabody Essex was very generous in letting us do all these things. But this one, because it has the person's mark, is probably the official one, but over there, they've copied it and cleaned it up. So, this is attested, the one on the right says attested, and that's attested by the clerk of the court. So maybe they just cleaned it up and it was sort of like a Xerox. We would have Xeroxes today and then some kind of notary. So that basically was the equivalent of a notarized copy of the real thing. This document is actually the thing that I was asking Bernie Rosenthal about, my initial email to him, because this is evidence against George Burroughs, one of the men who was executed. He had been the minister in Salem Village, but it's dated a month after he was executed. And I said, why is this being submitted in September? He was already dead in August. And I thought, maybe this is one of those transcription errors, another date that's gone wrong. And I wrote to him and said, I'm curious. And he wrote back and said, well, no, that actually is accurate on the document, and I did write about it in my book. But that's, he said, but there's something I'd like to talk to you about, and I don't know if you feel comfortable giving me your phone number, I'll give you mine, whatever. And that's when he asked me to be the project manager. And I'm thinking, this is the document, why? Because I was asking questions about it. And I don't think he had too many people asking that kind of question with that kind of specificity. He later on said, I knew what I was doing, and then we both laughed. So we have this kind of thing, so we're trying to figure out, and in our book, we transcribed both. In other editions or other collections of transcriptions, they would pick one and not have both. And I think having both is important because these are the public records. We want to see them all. We also had handwritten later copies, which I think is kind of interesting. This one on the upper left here, oh, look, yeah, it absorbs it. The one on the left looks like Samuel Parris's handwriting. It's really small and stuff, but if you look at it very carefully, it doesn't have his flow. And there are certain things in his handwriting that he just sort of did, and it turns out this is traced. This is a tracing. This trace is at the Boston Public Library in their collection, but the other is at Peabody Essex. And if you put them side by side, they are exactly the same. Clearly somebody traced it and then had this incredible copy. This middle one, the long one, is somebody's trying to copy one of the interrogations, and they kept the columns, but they used, it was probably 18th century handwriting to do this, but they tried to keep it line for line correct. The one up in the top, errata, I mean, that's clearly in a nice little hand, but it was in a book that was trying to correct some of the problems in another book. And in the far right, there were a lot of public records that were recopied. And so we see these nice, beautiful handwriting, but they weren't the originals. They copied them out of record books and things like that. So we really had to figure out, is this something from 1692, 1693, or is this some later thing? Because through the centuries, people are fascinated with this material. We also see a lot of the court records, not just from the Salem trials, but from 17th century across all the English colonies in the late 19th century, early 20th century. There are just books and books and books that people have gone through and transcribed court records. If you like archive.org, they have them all. It's amazing. And some of the research I've done has been really important to see some of these 19th century things, but push comes to shove, I want to see the originals because I've seen what problems can arise when people try and transcribe them, and I want accurate stuff. So maybe I'm there to contribute to the 10 years too. We also have published transcriptions of things that we may or may not have located as an original manuscript. So on the far left, that is a published account by Deodat Lawson. It was published in 1692. It's So we don't have a handwritten text for what he wrote about what happened in April of 1692 in Salem Village, but we do have what he published about it. It'd be really nice to find the manuscript. Not going to happen. The next one is if we had any acts or any government decrees. Yes, they officially wrote them out by hand and put the wax seals on them, but they were published to get it circulated so people would know. So there's some of those that we saw. The next one up there, that's a page from Califf. Robert Califf was a major critic of the trials and a really big critic of Cotton Mather. And his book really took issue with, it was a contemporaneous critique of the trials. So he has some of the letters, he has this whole exchange between the jurors in Rebecca Nurse's trial and Rebecca Nurse. So the only thing we know about the jurors is they say, oh, well, this is why we found her guilty. So there are little pieces in there that we don't have anywhere else. We have the minimus for John Alden, who was accused. The end of May, when they're getting ready to set up the court of Oyer and Terminer, they sent out warrants for all sorts of people. You know, have we missed anybody? And so there's some of his, and there's an account by John Alden of what happened to him during his interrogation. We don't have the original manuscripts. We have to trust these published transcriptions. And the one on the far right is from Governor Thomas Hutchinson's history of Massachusetts. He had clearly taken a lot of the original manuscripts out of the court records so that he could write the sections on the Salem witchcraft trials. And he had them clearly at his house. He has all sorts of little bits and pieces from various documents that we don't have anymore. But he was also the governor during the Stamp Act riot, and they went through his house. And they've recovered a lot of the drafts of the book. And somebody tells me, I think it was Gretchen, told me, yeah, there's still a boot print on one of them. But so his house got trashed. There are a lot of publications that have looked, well, Poole did these, looked to see, they have the early drafts of them, and sometimes Hutchinson had written in some quotations from other documents we don't have. But that didn't end up in the book. So there are a lot of attempts to figure out what Hutchinson had, but that we lost a lot of manuscripts probably in that. But we have little bits and pieces from those. And every once in a while, you know, somebody finds something else that got published somewhere, but we don't have the document. So for instance, in the case of Margaret Scott, we only have a certain number of documents. And these are pages from the 1840 history of Rowley by Thomas Gage. So this has the 7 or 8, I think it's 7, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 7 documents that are in her case. Yeah, 7. Sorry, 9, I'm seeing my notes, 9. Sorry, but there are only 9 of them, and we don't really know too much about Margaret Scott. One of Mary Beth Norton's students at Cornell, when she first started doing an undergraduate seminar and having her students do real research, Mark Rice, who is now, I think he's got his doctorate in history, but he was like a sophomore at Cornell, and he did a research project to find out about Margaret Scott. So if you're interested in her case, that's really the main source. But the documents in there, where were they? Well, 2 of them have shown up in private hands. Those are the ones, every time something comes up for auction, it's 2 of the Margaret Scott documents. There's another one in the Peabody Essex collection. So there we go, we've got a couple of them there. Let's see, 2, 3. We still are missing 6. Well, one thing happened was that after we did the book, Matti Pekola and Peter Grund and I decided to go around to various archives, including coming here, and we had 2 weeks of archive hopping. We decided we wanted to see what other documents existed for that time period, because we wanted to know if we could find more samples of different handwriting, if we could identify people by looking outside of the Salem collection. The book had already been published, but we were really interested in seeing if we could find out who people were by looking outside of that. So we were looking at anything from the end of the 17th century. We were at the Boston Public Library, and we were looking for anything, and we're looking at all the towns, and Peter finds the R drawer, looks for Rowley, and I swear, card catalog card that said 4 documents in the case of Margaret Scott. And he, what do you think this is? And I said, well, it could be a treasure trove because we don't have much on Margaret Scott. So we called him up, and this is what we got. 4 original documents in 1 folder. Bad archivist. Yeah. But 4 original documents, they hadn't been silked, they had no preservation to them. Again, 4 original documents in 1 archival folder. So it was a little scary, but it was also thrilling. But these are 4 of the ones that were in the book from Rowley from 1840. So we were very happy to find them, but it was a little scary. We took pictures of them. There were a few people around. We're trying to go. Throw them over, here, you hold them, I'll hold them, that kind of thing. We were just like, we found some new documents to look at. And for us, even though the texts were already known because of Gage's history, for us, we're looking at the handwriting, we're looking at all sorts of details. And another thing about looking at the original manuscripts is past transcriptions might not include all the details that we really like. We like looking at the backside. Oh, what's that on the backside? And you never know on the transcription whether they really were looking for everything. And we were looking for everything anybody wrote on each piece of paper. So these were just wonderful. Do you know this story? Maybe. So 2 weeks of archive hopping. We were about a week in when we hit the Boston Public Library, and we were all excited. The day before Monty and Peter were going to leave to go back to Finland and Kansas, they were staying in the Back Bay, so Peter said he was going to go back down and look at them again. So he went down to Boston Public Library again, got in, because you have to go through all sorts of things. You practically have to take off everything right down to your underwear. A lot of these places, they're very afraid of things getting stolen. Rightfully so. There have been enough people who have done this thing and stolen incredible things. They're always, you can't bring in anything but pencils. Even at the Mass Historical Society, they give you the paper you take notes on. It's blue. Because they don't want you to say, oh no, this is my note. Quite often, you're issued your white gloves. You have a locker you can put your things in. You can bring in computers. They'd rather have you bring in computers because you're not going to write on any of their things. And usually you get one thing at a time. So he went back to take a look at them because, yay, manuscripts. So he went in, did all of his stuff, put in the call slip. And they came back and said, we can't find them.
Oh, no.
And he went, what? We saw them last week. We can't find them. And basically blew him off. Well, when we find them, we'll let you know. And as he's going back to Kansas. And it was very troubling. And when he told the 2 of us, they were about to leave. That was the end of our 2 weeks of stuff. So he said, well, I'll keep track of her. And a couple weeks later, he contacted the Rare Books and Manuscripts thing and basically got the same thing. We'll let you know. And it was about maybe a month and a half later, I was home. I had a cold. I was going to call. So I decided to call. And one of the things that I do when I go to archives is I keep track of everybody's name. So I called and I got the receptionist. I said, hey, right now it's written down, it's not on my head, but that's why I keep notes. So I said, hey, is so-and-so here? I'm not going to name names of anybody there. Is so-and-so in today? Oh no, but she'll be in tomorrow. I said, okay, I'll call her tomorrow. I was still sick the next day at home. I called up, got her, she said, we'll let you know when we find them. This is not okay. Because this was in March of the same year one of those documents, one of the Margaret Scott documents went up. It was like that week. It sold for like $30,000. Yeah. And these are 4 documents in her case. And there'd been this public auction, a lot of talk about it. It had made $30,000, and that was for an indictment. Indictments are boring. Well, I think they're interesting, but generally speaking. Things like this, depositions in handwriting, those go for much more valuable. I mean, we're probably looking at about $1 million worth of documents if you look at some of the prices of these things in one So we're thinking, oh my goodness, who else was in the room? Did somebody take it? Did somebody hear us? Da, 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 da. And so on that second call, after she put me off, I called a friend of mine. I said, you used to work at Boston Public Library, didn't you? And she said, yeah. I said, who do I talk to? So I said, these are the people up the chain. And she picked one and said, yeah, she's a good person. Well, she'll be on it. So I called this woman and I said, this is the situation. I'm going to assume that they were, just misfiled. That when they were put back, they weren't put back in the right place. But at the same time, I'm thinking they could have been stolen. Even though they have us stripped to our underwear and stuff like that to actually get in there. I mean, somebody working there could conceivably have gone, they were really interested in that and stashed them. I'm thinking, they didn't put them back in the right place. So this woman said, I'm on it. About 4 hours later, she called me and said, I have them on my desk right now. If you would like to come down to see them at any time, I know where they are. They are going to be filed properly, but they were misfiled. Apparently when Peter had been in there and they hadn't had them, the person just ran up and down, the person who actually goes and fetches things and puts them back, like he made this big problem, but it was, who knows? But the person that I called found them and then they got filed properly. Okay, so does anybody else remember when the Boston Public Library had some other documents missing? Yes.
Yeah.
Was it a Durer and
That's right.
a Rembrandt?
Yeah.
Yes. Oh my, there were people who lost jobs over that.
Yeah.
Because, how dare, and it brought up big discussions about why would libraries even have things like that, so they have things like that because people give them to libraries expecting them to have archives. And they're wonderful things, but it turns out, what happened to them? They were misfiled. They found them 80 feet from where they were supposed to be. And I've been saying all along, they didn't put it back in the right place. And so when it turns out that was the case, I was going, told you so. And then, I don't know, I'm never going to be welcome back to Boston Public Library because I contacted the reporter who was covering the story. And I said, I knew this was going to be the case, and this is what happened to 4 documents from the Salem witchcraft trials. And I talked to her a couple of times, and you know how they would lead to her